Richard Hale had exactly 3 rules for his household staff. Maintain professional distance, never touch his disabled daughter Clara, and remember their place. So when he caught his black maid Evelyn hugging his crying 10-year-old, the firing was immediate. No explanations, no second chances, just cold dismissal in front of witnesses who'd spread the story across Connecticut's elite circles by nightfall. But karma has a sense of timing. The very next morning, as Clara choked on her breakfast, turning blue while her father watched helplessly, only one person knew exactly what to do. The woman he'd thrown out like trash. The woman who came back anyway. And suddenly billionaire Richard Hale was about to learn that sometimes the people we push away hardest are the only ones who can save us. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Hale mansion, each beam of light catching the dust particles that danced through the air despite Evelyn Walker's best efforts to keep them at bay. She moved through the grand foyer with practiced efficiency, her cleaning supplies arranged on a small cart that barely whispered against the imported Italian tiles. At 32, Evelyn had developed a rhythm to her work that made even the most mundane tasks feel purposeful. The mansion sprawled across 15 acres of manicured Connecticut countryside, its limestone facade and towering columns speaking to old money and new ambitions. Every room told a story of wealth accumulated and carefully displayed. Persian rugs that cost more than most people's annual salaries, paintings by artists whose names appeared in textbooks, and furniture that belonged to museums rather than homes. Evelyn had been working here for 6 months now, long enough to know which floorboards creaked and which doors needed an extra push to close properly. She knew that Mr. Richard Hale preferred his coffee at exactly 170 degrees, that the library needed dusting every other day because he actually read those books, and that the third stair from the top made a sound that would wake the entire household if stepped on wrong. What she knew most of all, though, was that this house, for all its grandeur, felt empty. "Good morning, Miss Walker," came a small voice from the hallway. Evelyn turned to see Clara Hale, 10 years old with strawberry blonde hair that caught the morning light like spun gold. The girl sat in her custom wheelchair, her thin legs covered by a quilted blanket despite the warm September morning. Clara's green eyes, the same shade as her late mother's, according to the portraits throughout the house, held a brightness that her circumstances hadn't dimmed. "Good morning, Miss Clara," Evelyn replied, offering a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" Clara wheeled herself closer, the electric motor of her chair humming softly. "I had that dream again, the one where I could run." Evelyn's heart tightened, but she kept her expression gentle. "Those are good dreams to have. Father says dwelling on impossibilities is wasteful thinking," Clara said, mimicking her father's stern tone with surprising accuracy. Before Evelyn could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the main staircase. Richard Hale descended with the bearing of a man who owned not just this mansion, but several companies whose logos appeared on products worldwide. At 45, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet 3 inches of tailored suits and calculated movements. His brown hair, peppered with premature gray, was slicked back with mathematical precision. "Clara, you have tutoring at 9, he said without looking at either of them. His attention was already on his phone, scrolling through what Evelyn could glimpse were stock reports and emails marked urgent. "Mrs. Pemberton doesn't appreciate tardiness." "Yes, Father," Clara responded, her voice losing its earlier warmth. Richard's gaze briefly flickered to Evelyn. "The main bathroom needs attention. The new clients will be here for lunch." "Yes, Mr. Hale," Evelyn said, maintaining professional distance even as she noticed Clara's shoulders slump. Richard strode toward his study, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor with metronomic precision. The door closed with a definitive thud that seemed to echo through the entire first floor. Clara watched him go, then turned back to Evelyn. "He wasn't always like this, you know. Before Mother died, he used to laugh. He even took me to the park sometimes." Evelyn knew she should simply nod and return to work, but something in Clara's voice made her pause. "People handle grief differently, honey." The words slipped out, before she could stop it. Clara's eyes widened slightly, not in offense, but in surprise. It had been so long since anyone had used a term of endearment with her. "I should get ready for Mrs. Pemberton," Clara said, but she lingered for a moment longer. Evelyn paused in polishing the silverware. "That wouldn't be appropriate, Miss Clara. I have my meals in the kitchen." "But why? You're here all the time anyway." "Because that's how things work in houses like this," Evelyn explained gently. "Your father has rules, and it's important to respect them." That evening at dinner, Clara pushed her food around her plate, barely eating. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany table, reviewing documents while mechanically consuming his meal. The only sounds were the clink of silverware and the distant hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. "I don't want to eat," Clara announced suddenly. Richard looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "Clara, we discussed this. Proper nutrition is essential for your condition. I want Miss Evie to sit with me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard set down his fork with deliberate precision. "She's staff, Clara, not family. Staff eat in the kitchen, family eats in the dining room. These boundaries exist for a reason." "What reason?" Clara challenged, showing a spark of defiance that surprised them both. "The reason is that it's how things are done," Richard said, his tone brooking no argument. "Miss Walker understands her position. You should understand yours." From the kitchen doorway, Evelyn appeared, having heard the raised voices. "I apologize if I've overstepped, Mr. Hale. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Richard replied coldly. "Clara, finish your dinner." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she picked up her fork and forced herself to eat, each bite feeling like sandpaper in her throat. Evelyn retreated to the kitchen, her own appetite gone. That night, Richard called Thomas into his study. The elderly butler, who'd served the family for 20 years, stood at attention despite his 71 years. "I want you to keep an eye on Miss Walker," Richard said, not looking up from his computer screen. "She seems to be getting too familiar with Clara." Thomas hesitated before responding. "Miss Walker has been nothing but professional, sir. Clara seems to have taken a liking to her, but that's hardly—" "Just do as I ask, Thomas. I don't pay you for your opinions." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, though something in his expression suggested disapproval. Meanwhile, in her apartment above the garage, Evelyn sat on her narrow bed, holding the photograph of Marcus. The room was simply furnished but clean, with touches that made it personal. A quilt her mother had made, a small collection of books, and a spider plant that somehow thrived despite the limited sunlight. She thought about Clara, about the loneliness that radiated from the girl like heat from fever. It reminded her so much of Marcus in his final years, when their parents had died and she'd become his guardian at 22. The same need for connection, the same hunger for someone to see them as more than their limitations. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Clara in her wheelchair, having somehow navigated the narrow staircase with the chair's stair-climbing function. "Clara, you shouldn't be here. If your father, he's in a video conference with Tokyo. He'll be there for hours." Clara wheeled herself inside without invitation, looking around the small space with curious eyes. "Is this where you live?" "Yes, but you really should go back." "Is that your brother?" Clara asked, noticing the photograph. Evelyn's breath caught. "Yes, that's Marcus. Where is he now?" "He passed away when he was 16. Clara was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the gravity that children sometimes surprise you with. "Was he sick like me?" "He had muscular dystrophy," Evelyn said softly. "Different from your condition, but yes, he was sick." "Is that why you're so nice to me?" "Because I remind you of him." Evelyn knelt down to Clara's eye level, choosing her words carefully. "I'm nice to you because you deserve kindness, Clara. Everyone does, but especially brave girls who face each day with courage even when it's hard." "I don't feel brave," Clara whispered. "I feel scared all the time. Scared that Father will send away everyone who cares about me, like he did with Nanny Margaret last year." "Why did he send her away?" "She hugged me at Christmas. He said it was inappropriate emotional attachment." Evelyn's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. "Your father loves you, Clara. He just shows it differently. He shows it by keeping everyone at a distance, Clara said with wisdom beyond her years. You're the only one who makes me feel safe, Miss Evie. Please don't let him send you away too. I'll be careful, Evelyn promised, though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. From main house, they heard a door slam. Clara's eyes widened in panic. Go, Evelyn urged, helping Clara navigate back to the door. Quickly, before he realizes you're gone. Clara wheeled herself out, but turned back at the threshold. Miss Evie, thank you for telling me about Marcus. I won't tell anyone, I promise. As Clara disappeared into the night, Evelyn closed her door and leaned against it, unaware that Richard had indeed finished his conference early and had watched his daughter's secretive journey from his bedroom window. His expression was stone, but his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, a sign of the storm brewing within. The next afternoon arrived with unusual warmth for late September, the sun painting golden patches across the mansion's extensive gardens. Evelyn was helping Clara navigate the winding garden path, where the previous landscape designer had prioritized aesthetics over accessibility. The decorative gravel, while visually pleasing, made wheelchair navigation nearly impossible. Here, let me help, Evelyn said, gently guiding the wheelchair around a particularly troublesome patch where the gravel had scattered. Clara's hands gripped the armrests tightly, frustration evident in every line of her small body. I hate this chair. I hate that I can't even move through my own garden without help. I know it's frustrating, Evelyn said, crouching down beside the wheelchair, making sure she was at Clara's eye level. But you know what I see? I see a girl who keeps trying even when it's hard. That takes real strength. The dam that Clara had been building all morning finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as months of suppressed emotions came pouring out. Nobody sees me anymore, she sobbed. Not the real me. Father looks through me like I'm made of glass. The tutors talk over my head like I'm not even there. The other kids at the therapy center stare at my chair, not at me. I'm invisible, Miss Evie. I'm nothing but this stupid chair and these useless legs. Without thinking, Evelyn pulled Clara into a gentle embrace, feeling the girl's thin shoulders shake with the force of her tears. Oh, honey, you're not invisible. You're the brightest light in this whole place. You're smart and funny and brave, and anyone who can't see that is the one with the problem, not you. Clara buried her face in Evelyn's shoulder, clinging to her like a lifeline. Sometimes I wish you were my mom, she whispered, so quietly that Evelyn almost didn't hear it. Your mom would be so proud of who you are, Evelyn whispered back, stroking Clara's hair. So incredibly proud. Neither of them heard the approaching footsteps until it was too late. What the hell do you think you're doing? Richard's voice cracked like a whip across the garden. He stood at the entrance to the garden path, his face contorted with fury. Behind him, 3 men in expensive suits, his business partners who'd arrived early for their meeting, watched with barely concealed interest. Evelyn immediately released Clara and stood up, her heart racing. Mr. Hale, Clara was upset. Get away from her. Richard strode forward, his long legs covering the distance in seconds. He positioned himself between Evelyn and Clara, as if shielding his daughter from a threat. This is exactly what I was concerned about. You've completely overstepped your boundaries. Father, please, Clara begged, reaching for his arm. She was just comforting me. I was crying and... You're fired, Richard said, his voice cold and final. I want you off my property within the hour. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Hale, please, if you'd just let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I won't have you confusing my daughter with inappropriate displays of affection. She's not your child, Miss Walker. She's mine. She didn't do anything wrong. Clara screamed, her voice raw. I was upset. I needed someone, and she was there. She's always there, unlike you. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at his daughter. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that could have melted steel. Security will escort you to pack your things. Your final paycheck will be mailed. The business partners shifted uncomfortably in the background, exchanging meaningful glances. One of them, James Morrison, cleared his throat. Richard, perhaps we should. Wait in my study, Richard commanded without turning around. I'll be there shortly. As the men retreated toward the house, their whispers carried on the wind. Phrases like inappropriate behavior and boundary issues and can't trust help these days, floating back to where Evelyn stood frozen. Please. Evelyn tried one more time, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Clara needs. I know what my daughter needs, Richard interrupted. And it's not a maid who doesn't know her place. Security. 2 uniformed guards appeared, as if materialized from thin air, flanking Evelyn with professional detachment. Clara was sobbing now, reaching for Evelyn past her father's blocking form. Don't go. Please don't leave me. Father, please, I'm begging you. Take her to pack, Richard instructed the guards, then finally turned to his daughter. Clara, stop this behavior immediately. You're making a scene. I hate you, Clara screamed, the words echoing across the garden. You're the worst father in the world. Mom will be ashamed of you. Richard's face went white, then red. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might strike the child, but instead, he turned on his heel and walked back toward the house, his spine rigid with controlled fury. The walk to her apartment felt like a funeral march. Evelyn packed mechanically, folding her few possessions into the same suitcase she'd arrived with 6 months ago. The guards waited outside, their presence a reminder that she was now considered some kind of threat. A soft knock came at the door. Before the guards could react, Clara had wheeled herself inside, having taken the service elevator the guards hadn't known about. You can't leave, Clara said desperately. You promised you'd be careful. You promised. Evelyn knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Clara's hands in hers. Sometimes, honey, being careful isn't enough. But listen to me, this isn't goodbye forever. I'll find a way to check on you, even if I can't be here. He doesn't understand, Clara cried. He doesn't see that you're the only one who actually loves me. Your father loves you, Evelyn said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. He just doesn't know how to show it. Stop defending him. Clara pulled her hands away. He's cruel and cold, and I wish he was the one leaving, not you. Evelyn pulled a small card from her purse, scribbling a phone number on it. Hide this. If you ever truly need me, if there's an emergency, call this number. It's my cousin's house. She'll know how to reach me. Clara clutched the card like a treasure. I'll call every day. No, honey, only in emergencies. Your father. We can't make things worse. One of the guards knocked. Ma'am, we need to go. Evelyn stood, lifting her suitcase. Clara followed her to the door, then grabbed her hand one last time. I'll always be here when you need me, Evelyn promised. Even if he doesn't see it yet, even if I'm not physically here, I'm not abandoning you. Remember that. The journey out of the mansion felt surreal. Staff members peeked out from doorways, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with the careful neutrality of those who knew their jobs depended on not taking sides. Thomas gave her the slightest nod as she passed, a gesture that might have meant goodbye or might have meant he was sorry. Richard was nowhere to be seen, locked in his study with his business partners, but Evelyn could feel his presence like a weight on the house. As she reached the front door, dragging her suitcase behind her, Clara appeared at the top of the main staircase, having taken yet another route through the house. Miss Evie, she called out, her voice carrying through the marble foyer. I love you. Evelyn turned, tears finally flowing freely. I love you too, honey. And then she was outside, the massive door closing behind her with a finality that felt like the end of everything. That evening, Richard sat at the dinner table across from his daughter, who hadn't spoken a word since Evelyn left. Clara's plate remained untouched, her eyes red and swollen from crying. You need to eat, Richard said, his tone attempting reasonableness. Clara said nothing. Clara, this silent treatment is childish. Still nothing. I did what was best for you. That woman was overstepping boundaries, creating an unhealthy attachment. You'll understand when you're older. Clara finally looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes was worse than any anger could have been. I understand now. You're afraid of love because Mom's death broke you, so you break everyone else instead. She wheeled herself away from the table, leaving Richard alone with her untouched plate and words that cut deeper than any knife could. In his study later that night, Richard stood at the window overlooking the garden where the incident had occurred. His business partners had been politely skeptical of his actions, James Morrison going so far as to suggest that perhaps he'd overreacted. The woman was just comforting a crying child. Richard, James had said carefully. You don't understand, Richard had replied. You didn't see how Clara was becoming dependent on her. And dependence on a caring adult is worse than isolation. James had asked before Richard shut down the conversation. Now, alone with his thoughts, Richard tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. Boundaries were important. Structure was important. His daughter couldn't form attachments to every staff member who showed her kindness. But the image wouldn't leave his mind. Clara sobbing in Evelyn's arms, looking more at peace in that moment of emotional chaos than she had in months of controlled routine. He poured himself a scotch, then another, trying to drown out his daughter's words. Mom would be ashamed of you. In her cousin's cramped apartment across town, Evelyn sat on a pull-out couch, staring at her phone, willing it not to ring. If Clara called now, if she broke the emergency-only rule on the first night, it would make everything so much harder. The phone stayed silent. She thought about Clara alone in that massive house, surrounded by wealth but starved of warmth. She thought about Richard, building walls so high that even his daughter couldn't scale them. And she thought about Marcus, how he'd struggled to breathe in those final moments, how she'd held him and whispered that everything would be okay even though they both knew it wouldn't be. Tomorrow, she'd start looking for new work. Tomorrow, she'd begin the process of moving on. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for a little girl in a wheelchair who just needed someone to see her, and for a broken man who'd fired the only person who did. The morning after Evelyn's departure arrived gray and oppressive, matching the mood that had settled over the Hale mansion like a funeral shroud. Clara sat at the breakfast table, her shoulders hunched, staring at the elaborate spread that the new temporary maid, Susan Fletcher, had prepared. The woman was efficient but nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she poured orange juice into crystal glasses. Richard entered the dining room at precisely 7:30, his routine unchanged despite the previous day's upheaval. He wore another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray, and his face showed no sign of the sleepless night he'd endured. If he noticed the dark circles under Clara's eyes or the way she flinched when he pulled out his chair, he gave no indication. "Good morning, Clara," he said, unfolding his Wall Street journal with practiced precision. Clara didn't respond. Susan hovered uncertainly near the sideboard, unsure whether to serve or retreat. She'd been briefed by Thomas about the previous maid's dismissal, warned about maintaining appropriate professional distance. The warning had made her terrified of even looking directly at the child. "Clara, acknowledge when you're spoken to," Richard said without looking up from his newspaper. "Good morning," Clara mumbled, her voice barely audible. "You need to eat something," Richard observed, noting her untouched plate. "Mrs. Pemberton mentioned you were unfocused during yesterday's lessons. Proper nutrition is essential for cognitive function." "I'm not hungry." Richard set down his newspaper with deliberate slowness, a sign that his patience was wearing thin. "Clara, this behavior needs to stop. Miss Walker is gone. Sulking won't change that fact." "Her name is Evelyn," Clara said, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. "She has a name. Had. She had a position here, and now she doesn't. The sooner you accept that, the better." "You're heartless," Clara whispered. Richard's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a message from his Tokyo office about a crisis with one of their manufacturing plants. "Eat something," he commanded, already standing to leave. "At least the toast. Susan, make sure she eats." Susan nodded frantically, clearly uncomfortable with being put in this position. As Richard strode out, already barking orders into his phone, she approached Clara cautiously. "Would you like me to butter your toast, miss?" she asked, her voice high with anxiety. "I don't want anything from you," Clara said, though her anger wasn't really directed at this nervous woman. "You're not her. I understand, Mississippi, but your father said, Phoenix." Clara grabbed a piece of dry toast from the serving plate, her movements sharp with frustration. Happy. She took a large, angry bite, barely chewing before attempting to swallow. The bread was thicker than usual. Artisanal, Thomas had called it when he'd ordered it, trying to maintain the household's high standards even in chaos. Clara had taken too big a bite, and the dry bread formed a dense mass in her throat. At first, she simply tried to cough quietly, not wanting to draw attention. But the bread wouldn't move. Her hands went to her throat as panic set in. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't make a sound beyond a horrible wheezing. Susan stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. Miss Clara? Miss Clara! Clara's lips were already beginning to turn blue, her small hands clawing at her throat. The wheelchair rocked as she struggled, her body's desperate fight for air. Mr. Hale! Susan screamed, her paralysis finally breaking. Help! Someone help! Richard came running, his phone clattering to the floor. When he saw Clara's blue-tinged face, her eyes bulging with fear, his usual composure shattered completely. Clara! Clara! He slapped her back, but the angle was wrong with her seated in the wheelchair. The bread remained lodged. Call 911, he shouted at Susan, who stood sobbing, useless with panic. Thomas burst in from the kitchen, took one look at the situation, and ran for the house phone. Other staff members appeared in doorways, drawn by the screaming, but none knew what to do. Clara's movements were becoming weaker, her panic fading into something far more terrifying: stillness. No, no, no. Richard tried to pull Clara from her chair, but his hands were shaking too badly. For all his power, all his control, he was helpless. Please, someone, move. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Evelyn stood in the doorway, having returned to retrieve a locket she'd left in the garden shed. Her mother's locket, the only thing of value she owned. She'd heard the screaming from outside and hadn't hesitated. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, her movements precise and calm despite the terror of the scene. Without a word, she positioned herself behind Clara's wheelchair, wrapped her arms around the girl's small torso, and performed the Heimlich maneuver with practiced efficiency. Once, twice. On the third compression, the piece of toast dislodged, flying onto the pristine tablecloth. Clara gasped, a horrible, beautiful sound as air flooded back into her lungs. She collapsed forward, coughing violently, her body shaking with the effort of breathing. You came back, Clara wheezed, turning to grab Evelyn's hand with desperate strength. You came back. Evelyn knelt beside the wheelchair, her professional composure finally cracking as she smoothed Clara's hair back from her sweaty forehead. It's okay, honey. You're okay. Just breathe nice and slow. Richard stood frozen, his face pale as marble, watching this woman he'd banished save his daughter's life with the kind of swift competence he could never have managed. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing and quiet sobs. Richard started, then stopped, seemingly unable to form words. Thank you, he finally managed, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. Evelyn looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She needs water, small sips, and someone should still call a doctor to check her throat for damage. As if her words had broken a spell, everyone burst in emotion. Thomas ran for water. Susan fled to call the family physician, and the gathered staff dispersed, whispers already spreading through the house like wildfire. But Clara wouldn't let go of Evelyn's hand. Don't leave again, she begged, her voice raw. Please don't leave. Richard cleared his throat. Miss Walker, given the circumstances, perhaps we should discuss. I only came back for my mother's locket, Evelyn said quietly, still focused on Clara. I heard the screaming. That's all. The sound of car doors slamming drew their attention. Richard's business partners had arrived for their scheduled meeting, along with 2 potential investors for Boston. They entered through the main foyer just as Thomas was returning with water, taking in the scene. Clara clinging to Evelyn, Richard standing helplessly to the side, Susan crying in the corner. James Morrison, the partner who'd questioned Richard's decision yesterday, surveyed the situation with sharp eyes. What happened here? Miss Walker just saved Clara's life, Thomas said, his usually neutral tone carrying a note of accusation as he looked at Richard. She was choking. The men exchanged meaningful glances. Robert Steinberg, one of the Boston investors, recognized Evelyn from the local newspaper article that had run that morning about exceptional domestic workers in the area, though it hadn't mentioned her recent termination. "This is the maid you fired yesterday?" he asked Richard quietly. Richard's jaw worked, but no words came out. "The one you fired for hugging your crying daughter?" James added, his tone carefully neutral, but his meaning clear. "Perhaps we should reschedule," Richard said stiffly. "Perhaps we should," Robert agreed, his expression troubled. "James, might I have a word with you outside?" As the men filed out, their murmured conversation was just audible. Phrases like judgment concerns and public perception and what kind of man drifting back. Clara had finally stopped shaking, though she still held Evelyn's hand in a death grip. "Father, please." "She saved me." "You have to." "We'll discuss this later, Clara," Richard said, his voice strained. "Miss Walker, would you, that is, could you stay with Clara until the doctor arrives?" "Of course," Evelyn replied, though her tone made it clear she was doing it for Clara, not for him. Richard retreated to his study, closing the door firmly behind him. Through the window, he could see his business partners in the driveway, their animated discussion clearly not favorable to him. His phone buzzed with messages. Somehow, word was already spreading through his business network. In the dining room, Clara had finally taken a few sips of water, her color slowly returning to normal. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered to Evelyn. "I couldn't breathe, and all I could think was that I'd never see you again." "Shoo, you're safe now," Evelyn soothed. "That's all that matters." "He didn't know what to do," Clara said, glancing toward her father's study. "He just stood there. He's supposed to protect me, but he just stood there. He was scared," Evelyn said gently. "Fear can paralyze anyone, even fathers." "You weren't scared." "I was terrified," Evelyn admitted. "But I've been trained for this. I learned after." She paused, then continued quietly. "After my brother." Dr. Harrison arrived within 20 minutes, conducting a thorough examination of Clara's throat and declaring her fortunate to have avoided serious damage. He gave Evelyn a long look. "Your quick actions saved her life," he said. "A minute longer, and we might have been looking at brain damage from oxygen deprivation." After he left, Thomas approached Evelyn discreetly. "The staff is talking," he said quietly, "about how Mr. Hale fired the woman who saved his daughter's life. Some are saying they'll quit if he doesn't make this right." "That's not necessary, Thomas. Respect Miss Walker, but it is. This house has been cold as a tomb since Mrs. Hale passed. You brought warmth back." Clara laughed again. "And now this." He shook his head. "Some things are worth taking a stand for." By evening, what had started as household whispers had exploded into a full-blown crisis for Richard Hale. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, and his email inbox was flooded with messages from concerned investors, curious journalists, and business associates who'd heard various versions of the story, each more damaging than the last. He sat in his corner office at Hale Industries the next morning, watching his assistant field yet another call from a reporter. The story had evolved in the telling. Some versions had him physically dragging Evelyn from the property while Clara screamed. Others suggested he'd fired her for refusing his advances, and this was retaliation. "Mr. Morrison and Mr. Steinberg are here for the meeting," his assistant announced nervously. James Morrison entered first, his expression grim. Robert Steinberg followed, along with two other major investors Richard had been courting for months. "Gentlemen," Richard began, but James cut him off. "Richard, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. This situation with your maid." "Former maid," Richard corrected stiffly. "The woman who saved your daughter's life," Robert said pointedly. "The story's all over town. Hell, someone posted about it on social media. Billionaire fires nanny who saved his disabled daughter from choking. It's not a good look. She wasn't a nanny. She was household staff who overstepped." "Who saved Clara's life?" James interrupted. "Richard, I've known you for 15 years. Since Martha died, you've been different. We've all understood, given you space to grieve. But this? Firing a woman for comforting your crying child, and then having her save that child's life the very next day? It makes you look cruel." Robert finished bluntly. It makes you look cruel and ungrateful. And frankly, it makes us question your judgment. If you can't see the value in someone who clearly cares for your daughter's well-being, how can we trust your judgment in business matters? Richard's hands clenched on his desk. My personal life has no bearing on my business acumen. Everything has bearing on everything in our world. And you know it, James said. Perception matters. Character matters. The board is already asking questions. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Clara was in full rebellion. She'd refused to work with her physical therapist, telling the woman frankly that there was no point in trying to walk if she had no one to walk toward. She'd locked herself in her room when the new tutors arrived, sliding a note under the door that simply said, "No Evelyn, no lessons." Thomas knocked on her door around noon. "Miss Clara, you need to eat lunch." "Is Evelyn back?" "No, Mississippi." "Then no." Thomas sighed, but before he could respond, Clara spoke again. "Thomas, can you keep a secret?" "That depends on the secret, Miss Clara." The door opened a crack, and Clara wheeled herself out, looking determined. "I need to use the phone in Father's study, the one he doesn't monitor." Thomas hesitated, loyalty to his employer warring with sympathy for the child. Finally, he nodded. "He'll be at the office until 6. Clara wheeled herself to the study with Thomas standing guard. She pulled out the card Evelyn had given her and dialed with shaking fingers. "Hello." Evelyn's voice sent relief flooding through Clara. "Miss Evie? It's me." "Clara. Honey, you shouldn't be calling unless. It is an emergency. I'm dying here. Not choking dying, but inside dying. Father's at work, and everyone's talking about what happened, and some reporters came to the gate, and everything's falling apart." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Clara, I can't come back. Your father. He's losing everything," Clara interrupted. "His investors are mad at him. The staff is whispering about quitting. Some kid from my therapy group sent messages saying their parents called him a monster. He did this to himself. But Miss Evie, I've never seen him so lost. That's not your responsibility to fix, honey. But what if it destroys him? What if he ends up all alone? He's my father. Even when I hate him, he's still my father." On her end of the line, Evelyn closed her eyes, hearing the pain in Clara's voice. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know. I miss you. And I think maybe he misses Mom so much that he's afraid to let anyone else matter." "You're very insightful for 10 years old. Trauma ages you," Clara said with bitter wisdom. "That's what my therapist says." Before Evelyn could respond, Clara heard the front door slam. "He's home early. I have to go." "Clara, wait." But Clara had already hung up, wheeling herself quickly out of the study. She met her father in the hallway, his face drawn and tired. "What were you doing in my study?" he asked, though his tone lacked its usual sharpness. "Looking for Mom's photo album," Clara lied smoothly. "The one from their trip to Paris." Richard's expression softened slightly at the mention of his wife. "It's in the library, 3rd shelf." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, father and daughter, 2 people sharing a house, but not a life. "Clara," Richard began, then stopped. "How are you feeling?" "Your throat." "It's fine," Clara said quietly. "Dr. Harrison says there's no permanent damage." "Good. That's good." "Father, why did you really fire Evelyn?" Richard stiffened. "I've already explained." "No, you gave me rules and boundaries and all that. But why really? What were you so afraid of?" Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. She had her mother's eyes, that same penetrating gaze that could see through all his carefully constructed walls. "I don't want you to get hurt," he said finally. "People leave, Clara. They always leave. Your mother," his voice broke slightly. "Your mother left, even though she didn't want to. And one day, Miss Walker would have left too. For another job, another family, another life. I was protecting you from that pain." "By causing me pain now?" Clara asked. "Father, you're so afraid of me losing people that you take them away yourself. That doesn't protect me. It just makes you the one who hurts me." She wheeled away, leaving Richard standing in the hallway, his daughter's words echoing in his mind. That evening, Evelyn was at her cousin's apartment when an unexpected visitor knocked. She opened the door to find Thomas standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Thomas? What are you doing here?" Miss Walker, I'm here unofficially. The staff, we've been talking. 13 of us are prepared to give notice if Mr. Hale doesn't rectify this situation. The house can't function without us, and he knows it. Tomas, no. You've been there 20 years. You can't throw that away for me. It's not just for you, Mississippi. It's for what's right. And for Clara. That child needs you. And we all saw what happens when you're not there. He'll never admit he was wrong. You know him. Thomas smiled slightly. Pride goeth before a fall, Miss Walker. And Mr. Hale is falling fast. The question is whether he'll catch himself before he hits bottom. After Thomas left, Evelyn sat staring at her phone, thinking about Clara's call, about the pain in the girl's voice. She pulled up a news alert on her phone and saw the story. It had indeed gone viral. Billionaire's heartless act backfires when fired Maid saves daughter. The comments were brutal. Richard Hale was being eviscerated in the court of public opinion. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message from James Morrison, whose number she recognized from the house's contact list. Miss Walker, I believe you should know that several of Mr. Hale's investors are reconsidering their partnerships. Your actions saved not just Clara, but potentially many jobs that depend on Hale Industries. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss a proposition that might benefit everyone, including Richard, though he's too stubborn to see it yet. Evelyn stared at the message, torn between her desire to help Clara and her anger at Richard's treatment of her. Another text came through, this one from Clara using someone's phone. Father's in a study drinking whiskey and looking at mom's pictures. I've never seen him cry before. I'm scared, Miss Evie. That decided it. Whatever her feelings about Richard Hale, Clara didn't deserve to watch her father self-destruct. She texted James Morrison back, I'll meet with you tomorrow. Back at the mansion, Richard sat alone in his study, a half-empty bottle of expensive scotch on his desk. In his hand was a photo from Clara's first birthday, Martha holding their laughing daughter while Richard looked on with an expression of pure joy. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that way. His laptop showed email after email, investors expressing concerns, partners suggesting he take a leave of absence to handle his personal affairs, even a message from his own board of directors requesting an emergency meeting to discuss recent events that may impact company image. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Clara wheeled herself in without waiting for permission. You shouldn't be in here, Richard said, though his tone was more tired than angry. You shouldn't be drinking alone in the dark, Clara countered. They sat in silence for a moment before Clara spoke again. Mom wouldn't want this. You don't know what she'd want. You were barely 4 when she died. I remember enough. I remember her laughing. I remember her hugging everyone, even the mailman when he brought good news. I remember her telling you to soften up. That love wasn't a weakness. Richard's hand tightened on the photo. Love is the greatest weakness there is. When you love someone and lose them, it destroys you. So you decided not to love anyone again, including me? Richard looked up sharply. I love you, Clara. You love the idea of me, the daughter you can control and protect and keep at arm's length. But you don't love the real me, the girl who needs hugs when she's sad and someone to laugh with when she's happy. Evelyn loved the real me. Stop talking about her. Why? Because you know I'm right? Because you know you made a terrible mistake and you're too proud to admit it? Go to your room, Clara. Clara didn't move. Make me. Oh, wait, you can't. Just like you couldn't save me when I was choking. You're so busy trying to control everything that you've forgotten how to actually do anything that matters. She wheeled herself to the door, then paused. I heard Thomas on the phone. Half the staff is planning to quit. Your investors are pulling out. The whole city thinks you're a monster. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe the only person in this whole mess who isn't right is you. She left, and Richard sat in the darkness, his empire crumbling around him, holding a photo of the family he once had and wondering how he'd become the man his daughter saw him as, a monster hiding behind walls of his own making. His phone buzzed. Another message from James Morrison. Richard, we need to talk. This has gone beyond personal. If you don't fix this and fast, everything you've built will collapse. The board is calling an emergency meeting for Monday. You have 3 days to make this right, or they're going to vote you out. Your call. Richard set down the phone and looked at the photo one more time. Martha smiled back at him, frozen in time, holding their baby daughter with pure joy. "What do I do?" he whispered to the image. "How do I fix this when I don't even know how it broke?" But he knew. Deep down, he knew exactly when it broke. It broke the day Martha died, and he decided that feeling nothing was better than risking that pain again. And in protecting himself, he'd hurt the one person Martha had trusted him to love and protect, their daughter. 3 days had passed since James Morrison's ultimatum, and Richard Hale stood at the entrance of the Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala, the kind of event where Connecticut's elite gathered to write large checks and feel good about themselves. He'd considered skipping it, but absence would have been seen as weakness, and he couldn't afford any more signs of vulnerability. The moment he entered the ballroom, conversations shifted. He could feel eyes following him, heard the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. Margaret Whitmore, the host and one of his mother's oldest friends, gave him a look that was equal parts pity and disappointment before turning away. "Richard," a familiar voice called out. Jennifer Lawrence, CEO of a competing firm and someone who'd never missed a chance to needle him, approached with a champagne flute and a sharp smile. "Brave of you to show your face. I heard the most interesting story about your household management skills." "Jennifer," Richard replied coolly, taking a glass from a passing waiter he didn't intend to drink. "Is it true you fired the woman who saved your daughter's life? Or did she quit after saving her?" Jennifer's voice carried just enough to ensure nearby guests could hear. "The stories vary depending on who's telling them. I don't discuss my household staff at social events." "Staff? I heard she was practically raising your daughter. The only person who could make the poor girl smile since her mother died." Jennifer sipped her champagne. "But then, you always were better with spreadsheets than people, weren't you?" Richard's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Actually, I heard the maid deserved a medal," said William Ashford, one of the city's most influential philanthropists. "Saving a child from choking while the father stood there helpless? That takes real presence of mind." "The situation was more complex than the rumors suggest," Richard said stiffly. "It always is," William replied, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it for a second. "Though I have to wonder what complexity justifies firing someone for hugging a crying child." The circle of listeners grew larger. Richard felt like a wounded animal surrounded by predators. "Perhaps," Jennifer added with false sympathy, "it's difficult for those who've never lost a spouse to understand. Grief can make people act irrationally, push away those trying to help." "Though it's been 6 years," someone murmured from the crowd. Richard set down his untouched glass with excessive force. "If you'll excuse me." He walked away, but there was nowhere in the ballroom where the whispers didn't follow. Every conversation he approached died as he neared, replaced by awkward silence or transparent subject changes. His phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Miss Clara has locked herself in her room again. She's refusing her medications. Says there's no point in taking them." Richard left immediately, his departure noted by everyone and surprising no one. Back at the mansion, he found Dr. Harrison in the hallway outside Clara's room, looking frustrated. "She won't open the door," the doctor said. "She needs these medications, Richard. Her condition could deteriorate without them." Richard knocked on the door. "Clara, open this door immediately." "Go away," came the muffled reply. "Clara, this is not a game. You need your medication. I don't need anything from you." Richard's control finally snapped. He slammed his fist against the door frame, making everyone jump. "Open this door right now, or I'll have it removed from hinges." Silence. Then the click of a lock. Clara sat in her wheelchair by the window, looking small and fragile. She'd lost weight in the past week, her face gaunt and pale. "Take your medication," Richard ordered. "No, this is not negotiable." Neither was firing Evelyn, but you did it anyway. Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Clara, sweetheart, these pills help manage your condition. Without them, maybe I'll get worse, and Father will have to actually deal with me instead of just managing me like one of his companies." "That's enough," Richard said sharply. "You're taking these pills." "Make me," Clara challenged, echoing her words from days earlier. Richard stepped forward, then stopped. He couldn't force pills down his daughter's throat. He couldn't make her want to fight for her health. He couldn't do anything but stand there, once again helpless. "This is what Evelyn was talking about," Clara said quietly. "She told me once that the hardest part of caring for someone wasn't the physical stuff. It was watching them give up, watching them stop fighting. She said she watched her brother do that near the end. Don't. I'm giving up, Father. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being alone in this huge house with people who are paid to tolerate me. I'm tired of being managed instead of loved." Dr. Harrison quietly gathered his medical bag. "I'll leave the medications here. Please call if she changes her mind." He gave Richard a look that was both professional and deeply concerned. "Mr. Hale, this level of depression in a child her age, she needs more than medication. She needs a reason to take it." After the doctor left, Richard stood in Clara's doorway, watching his daughter stare out the window at nothing. "Your mother wouldn't want this," he said finally. "Mom wouldn't have fired the only person who made me happy," Clara replied without turning around. That night, Clara's condition worsened. Not physically, but emotionally. She stopped eating entirely, wouldn't even drink water unless Thomas practically begged her. When Richard tried to carry her to the dining room, she went completely limp, becoming dead weight in his arms. "Please, Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "Please don't do this." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why should I try when you won't? You gave up on love, on happiness, on everything that makes life worth living. Why shouldn't I?" It was then that Richard realized his daughter wasn't just depressed. She was modeling his behavior, showing him a mirror of his own emotional shutdown. And the reflection was terrifying. In desperation, he called James Morrison. "I need help," Richard said, the words feeling like ground glass in his throat. Finally ready to admit that, James asked, "She won't eat, won't take her medication. The doctor says she's giving up, and I don't know what to do. Bring Evelyn back." "It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Your pride versus your daughter's life. Choose." After hanging up, Richard found himself in Clara's room again. She'd fallen asleep in her wheelchair, still by the window. She looked so small, so fragile. He carefully lifted her into bed, noting how light she'd become. As he pulled the blanket up to her chin, she stirred slightly. "Miss Evie used to tuck me in," she mumbled, half asleep. "She said I was brave. Nobody else thinks I'm brave." "I think you're brave," Richard whispered. "No, you don't. You think I'm broken." She fell back asleep, leaving Richard sitting on the edge of her bed, wondering when everything had gone so wrong. His phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Robert Steinberg. "Richard, I'm calling as a courtesy. The board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. They're not waiting until Monday. If you don't have a resolution to this situation by then, they're voting you out. I'm sorry, but the negative publicity is affecting stock prices. We can't afford to wait." After Robert hung up, Richard walked through his empty mansion. The staff had gone home, those who hadn't already quit. 5 had given notice that day alone. The house felt like a mausoleum, all cold marble and echoing silence. He found himself in the garden where he'd fired Evelyn, the spot where Clara had been crying in her arms. He could still see it so clearly, the way Evelyn had held his daughter, the way Clara had clung to her, the pure love and comfort in that simple gesture. And he'd seen it as a threat. His phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. "Sir, I feel you should know that Miss Walker has been visiting Clara's physical therapy center, checking on her progress with the staff. She's also been to the school, ensuring Clara's assignments are being sent home. She's caring for your daughter, even after what you did to her. I thought you should know what kind of person you fired." Richard sank onto a garden bench, his head in his hands. He'd fired a woman who continued to love and protect his daughter, even after being banished. He'd pushed away someone who'd shown more maternal care for Clara in 6 months than he'd shown paternal care in 6 years. Late that night, unable to sleep, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He went through Martha's things. In a box of her personal effects, he found a journal she'd kept during her illness. He'd never been able to read it before. One entry stopped him cold. "I worry about Richard after I'm gone. He loves so deeply, but fears it so much. I worry he'll shut down, push everyone away. I worry about our Clara, that she'll grow up with a father who's there, but not present. If you're reading this, Richard, please remember, walls keep out pain, but they also keep out love. Our daughter needs love more than she needs protection. Don't let fear rob her of her father. Richard closed the journal, tears he hadn't shed in 6 years finally falling. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Richard's mood as he prepared for what might be his last day as CEO of his own company. He was adjusting his tie when Thomas knocked on his bedroom door. "Sir, there's something you need to see," Thomas said, holding a folder. "I don't have time, Thomas. The board meeting. This is about Miss Walker, sir. And Clara. I think you need to see it before you go." Richard took the folder, opening it to find medical records, incident reports, and notes. His hands stilled as he read. 6 weeks into Evelyn's employment, Clara had experienced severe muscle spasms during the night. The overnight staff had been off duty, but Evelyn had heard Clara's cries from her apartment above the garage. She'd rushed in, recognized the signs of a serious complication, and driven Clara to the emergency room herself. She'd stayed all night, holding Clara's hand through painful tests. She'd never mentioned it, never submitted overtime, never even told Richard. There was more. 3 months ago, during a routine checkup Richard had been too busy to attend, Clara's doctor had missed a warning sign in her blood work. Evelyn, who'd accompanied Clara, had noticed the irregularity. Her experience with Marcus had taught her to read medical charts. She'd insisted on additional tests over the doctor's initial dismissal. Those tests revealed an issue with Clara's medication that, left unchecked, could have caused permanent kidney damage. Evelyn had saved Clara's life twice before the choking incident, and Richard had never known. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Richard asked, his voice hollow. "Miss Walker insisted we not worry you," Thomas said quietly. "She said you had enough on your plate running your company. She said Clara was what mattered, not credit." Richard kept reading. There were receipts. Evelyn had been buying special cushions for Clara's wheelchair with her own money, softer ones that prevented sores. She'd been paying for Clara to have access to an online support group for children with similar conditions, creating the account in her own name so Richard wouldn't be bothered with the bills. The final document was a letter from Clara's physical therapist, dated a week before Evelyn was fired. Miss Walker's dedication to Clara's recovery is extraordinary. She researches new therapies on her own time, practices exercises with Clara between sessions, and provides the emotional support crucial for a child facing physical challenges. Clara has made more progress in 6 months with Miss Walker's support than in the previous 2 years. I cannot overstate how vital she is to Clara's well-being. Richard's phone rang. "James Morrison, you have 1 hour before the board meeting," James said. "Have you made a decision?" "I need to see something first," Richard said, already heading for his car. 20 minutes later, he stood outside a modest apartment building, the folder still in his hand. He climbed the narrow stairs to Unit 3B and knocked. Evelyn opened the door, surprise flickering across her face before settling into careful neutrality. "Mr. Hale, may I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. The apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and photographs. Richard's eyes went immediately to a wall covered in pictures, many of Marcus, but also several of Clara that she must have taken during her time at the mansion. Clara laughing, Clara in the garden, Clara working on her physical therapy. "Why?" Richard asked, holding up the folder. "Why did you do all this and never tell me?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Because it wasn't about you. It was about Clara. The kidney damage. You saved her from permanent harm. I did what anyone who cared would do. But you did it after I fired you too. Thomas says you've been checking on her at therapy, at school. Just because you fire me doesn't mean I stop caring about her," Evelyn said simply. "Love doesn't work that way. At least it shouldn't." Richard set down the folder, his hands shaking slightly. "I've made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you have. My wife, Martha, she died 6 years ago." "I know. What you don't know is that she died in my arms. A brain aneurysm. One moment she was laughing at something Clara had done. The next she was gone. Just gone. No warning, no goodbye, just gone." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "I promised myself I'd never feel that kind of pain again, Richard continued. I built walls around everything, including Clara. I told myself I was protecting her, but I was protecting myself. And when I saw you with her, saw how much she loved you, all I could think was that one day you'd leave, quit, get married, move away, and she'd be devastated again. So you devastated her yourself? I'm a fool, Richard admitted. A fool who's about to lose his company, his staff, and most importantly, his daughters will to fight. Clara's not fighting. She's given up. Won't eat. Won't take her medication. Says there's no point. Richard's voice broke. She's modeling my behavior, showing me what emotional shutdown looks like from the outside. And it's killing her. Evelyn was moving before he finished speaking, grabbing her coat. We need to go. Now. You'll come back. Not for you, Evelyn said firmly. For Clara. The drive back to the mansion was silent, but Richard noticed Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap, her worry for Clara evident in every line of her body. They found Clara in her room, even paler than the day before. When she saw Evelyn, her eyes widened, then filled with tears. You came, Clara whispered. Of course I came, Evelyn said, crossing the room quickly and pulling Clara into a gentle hug. Thomas called me, told me you weren't eating. There was no point, Clara mumbled into Evelyn's shoulder. Everything was gray without you. Well, I'm here now, and you're going to eat something and take your medication, and we're going to figure this out together. Okay? Clara nodded, then looked at her father, standing in the doorway. Did you make him bring you back? No, honey. He came to find me himself. Why? Richard stepped forward. Because I finally realized what I'd lost. Not just an employee, but someone who loved you the way your mother would have. Someone who saved you in more ways than I ever knew. He pulled out the medical records, showing Clara. She saved you from kidney damage, Clara. Caught something the doctors missed. And that night, you had the bat spasms? She drove you to the hospital herself. Clara looked at Evelyn. You never said. It wasn't about credit, Evelyn said. It was about keeping you safe. Richard's phone began ringing insistently, the board meeting. He looked at it, then at his daughter and Evelyn, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. He threw the phone on the bed, ignoring it. Mr. Hale, Evelyn said, surprised. Isn't that important? Nothing is more important than this, Richard said, than making this right. He got down on his knees beside Clara's wheelchair, something he'd never done before. Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been a terrible father. I was so afraid of losing you like I lost your mother that I pushed you away. I pushed everyone away, and I nearly lost you anyway. Clara's tears were flowing freely now. I just wanted you to love me. I do love you. I love you so much it terrifies me. And that terror made me cruel. He looked at Evelyn. I fired the best thing that ever happened to you because I was scared. Because she showed you the love I was too frightened to give. His phone rang again. This time he answered it, putting on speaker. Richard, where the hell are you? James Morrison's voice filled the room. The board is about to vote. Tell them the truth, Richard said, his eyes on Clara. Tell them I'm with my daughter and the woman who saved her life. Tell them I'm finally getting my priorities straight. And if they want to fire me for that, then I don't want to run that company anyway. There was silence on the other end. Then James said, I'll tell them. Richard, it's about damn time. After James hung up, Clara reached for her father's hand. The first time she'd voluntarily touched him in months. Do you really mean it? She asked. About priorities? I mean it, Richard said. I've spent 6 years dying inside, Clara. Watching you start to do the same thing finally woke me up. I can't bring your mother back, but I can stop pushing away everyone else who loves you. He turned to Evelyn. I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider coming back? Not as a maid, but as Clara's companion, her advocate, part of her care team, part of our family, really, with a salary that reflects your true value and the respect you always deserved. Evelyn looked at Clara, whose eyes were pleading. What do you think, Clara? Should I come back? Please, Clara whispered. Please come home. Evelyn smiled. Then I will. But there are going to be some changes, Mr. Hale. No more walls. No more treating staff like furniture. No more pushing people away. Agreed, Richard said immediately. And I want it in writing. A contract that says you can't fire me without cause and that cause has to be reviewed by an independent party. I'll have it drawn up today. Clara squeezed both their hands. Does this mean we can eat dinner together? All of us. Every night if you want, Richard said. And can Miss Evie help tuck me in? Of course. And can we put Mom's pictures back up around the house? You took them all down after she died. Richard's breath caught. Yes, we can do that too. Evelyn stood. Right now, though, someone needs to eat something and take her medication. I'll get it, Richard said, standing quickly. What would you like to eat, Clara? Clara looked surprised at being asked. Could we have pancakes? Mom used to make pancakes when I was sad. Pancakes it is, Richard said, heading for the door. I'll make them myself. You can cook, Clara asked, astonished. I used to before he paused. Before I stopped doing a lot of things. Maybe it's time I started again. As he left, Clara looked at Evelyn. Is this real? Is he really changing? People can change, honey, Evelyn said. Sometimes it takes almost losing everything to realize what really matters. Your father loves you. He just forgot how to show it. Will you help him remember? We'll both help him, Evelyn promised. Together. The following morning, news of Richard Hale's dramatic exit from his own board meeting had spread through every business publication in the state. Billionaire chooses family over fortune, read one headline. Hale's redemption, from heartless to heartful, read another, though Richard winced at the pun. He sat at the breakfast table, not in his study, not reviewing reports, but actually present, watching Clara eat the scrambled eggs Evelyn had prepared. It was the most Clara had eaten in a week, and color was slowly returning to her cheeks. The board wants to meet with you this afternoon, Thomas announced, bringing in the mail. Mr. Morrison called. He said they've postponed the vote pending your appearance. Tell them 4 o'clock, Richard said. I have something more important this morning. What's that? Clara asked. Your physical therapy appointment. I'm coming with you. Clara nearly dropped her fork. You're coming to therapy? If you'll have me. Clara looked at Evelyn, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, Clara said quietly. You can come. 2 hours later, at the Riverside Rehabilitation Center, Richard watched his daughter work through exercises he'd never bothered to observe before. The therapist, Mrs. Patterson, seemed shocked to see him there. Mr. Hale, what a surprise. I should have been here from the beginning, Richard said, his eyes on Clara as she struggled with parallel bars. What can I do to help? Well, Mrs. Patterson said, recovering from her surprise, encouragement is always valuable, and practicing the exercises at home between sessions makes a huge difference. Richard stepped closer to Clara, who was sweating with effort. You're doing great, sweetheart. The endearment, so foreign on his lips after years of formal distance, made Clara's eyes water. She pushed harder, taking one shuffling step, then another. That's the most progress she's made in months, Mrs. Patterson whispered to Evelyn. She just needed her father to see her. Evelyn replied softly. After therapy, they were heading to the car when a reporter approached. Jennifer Davis from the Connecticut Herald, who'd been covering the story from the beginning. Mr. Hale, is it true you're stepping down as CEO? Richard started to brush past her, then stopped. Clara and Evelyn watched curiously as he turned to face the reporter. I'm not stepping down, he said clearly, but I'm stepping up. For too long, I've had my priorities backward. My daughter nearly died while I stood frozen, and the woman I fired for showing her love was the only one capable of saving her. If the board wants to remove me for putting my family first, that's their choice. But I won't apologize for finally being the father my daughter deserves. And Miss Walker, the reporter asked, turning to Evelyn, you're returning to the household? Evelyn stepped forward. I'm returning as Clara's advocate and companion, not as a maid, but as someone recognized for their true value in Clara's life. Despite how you were treated, people deserve second chances, Evelyn said, glancing at Richard, especially when they're genuinely trying to change. Can I say something? Clara asked, surprising everyone. The reporter knelt down to Clara's level with her recorder. Of course, sweetheart. My dad made a mistake, Clara said clearly. A big one. But he's trying to fix it. And Miss Evie taught me that trying is the bravest thing you can do. So maybe instead of writing mean things about him, you could write about how it's never too late to change. How families can heal. That would be a better story. The reporter smiled, visibly moved. You know what? You're absolutely right. That afternoon, Richard entered the boardroom to find 12 stern faces waiting for him. Robert Steinberg sat at the far end, James Morrison to his right. Richard, Robert began formally. Your actions have created a public relations crisis that has cost this company millions in market value. I'm aware. You abandoned an emergency board meeting to deal with a personal matter. I did. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Richard stood, but instead of his usual commanding presence, there was something different about him. Something humble. Gentlemen, for 15 years, I've given this company everything. 60-hour weeks. Missed holidays. A marriage that suffered until my wife died, probably wondering if I loved my work more than her. And after she died, I gave even more because work was easier than feeling. He pulled out his phone, showing them a photo Thomas had taken that morning. Clara laughing at breakfast while Evelyn helped her with her exercises. This is the first time my daughter has smiled in a week. She smiled because I was there. Not her trust fund, not her therapist, me. Her father. The one person who should have been there all along, but wasn't. Richard, James said gently, we understand the personal growth, but the company will survive without me for a few hours a day. Richard interrupted. It won't thrive without stable leadership, I grant you. So here's my proposal. I remain CEO, but with modified responsibilities. I work from home 2 days a week to be present for Clara's therapy. I delegate more to the executive team, and we hire a full PR team to turn this story into something positive. And how do we do that? Robert asked skeptically. We lean into it. We establish the Hale Foundation for Childhood Disabilities. We champion work-life balance for all employees. We become the company that chose humanity over pure profit. In this climate, that's not weakness, it's revolutionary. The board members exchanged glances. And Richard continued, we publicly recognize Evelyn Walker with the first annual Martha Hale Compassion Award for exceptional care providers. We make her the face of why human kindness matters more than rigid hierarchies. You want to celebrate the woman you fired? Robert asked. I want to celebrate the woman who saved my daughter's life multiple times and taught me what really matters. If this company can't see the value in that, then it's not a company I want to lead. There was silence for a long moment. Then James Morrison spoke. All in favor of Richard's proposal? One by one, hands raised. Not all. There were 3 holdouts, but enough. Motion carried, James said. Richard, don't make us regret this. The only thing I regret is taking this long to get my priorities straight. As Richard left the building, his phone rang. It was Thomas. Sir, something remarkable is happening. The staff are resigned? They're all asking to return. They heard Miss Walker was coming back and that you've changed. Even Mr. Green wants to resume his position. Richard felt something ease in his chest. Tell them they're all welcome back. With raises. And Thomas? Thank you. For everything. 3 days later, the mansion hosted an event none of the staff had ever seen before. A casual dinner in the kitchen, with Richard, Clara, and Evelyn eating alongside Thomas, Mrs. Patterson from the therapy center, and several other staff members. This is weird, Clara whispered to Evelyn, but she was smiling. Good weird or bad weird? Evelyn asked. Good weird. Like Dad trying to cook weird. Richard, who was indeed attempting to help with dinner preparation, looked over. I heard that. My pasta isn't that bad. It's a little mushy, sir, Thomas said diplomatically, then looked shocked at his own boldness. But Richard laughed, actually laughed. Then you'd better teach me properly, Thomas. The evening was filled with something the mansion hadn't heard in years. Genuine warmth. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and Clara was the center of attention in the best possible way. Later, as Evelyn helped Clara get ready for bed, Clara asked, Is this going to last? Or will he go back to how he was? Change is hard, Evelyn said honestly. There might be setbacks, but your father loves you, and now he's learning how to show it. That's what matters. Will you stay, even if he has setbacks? I signed a contract, remember? I'm not going anywhere. That's not what I mean. Will you stay because you want to, not because you have to? Evelyn hugged her gently. Honey, I came back before any contract. I stay because I love you. That's never going to change. Meanwhile, Richard stood in his study, looking at a photo of Martha he'd finally put back on his desk. Beside it was a new photo, one from dinner, showing Clara laughing while covered in flour from their attempted baking lesson. His phone buzzed with an email from Jennifer Davis. The article was being published tomorrow, titled The Redemption of Richard Hale, a story of second chances. But more important than any headline was the knock on his door. Clara wheeled herself in, Evelyn behind her. "Father, will you help tuck me in?" It was such a simple request, but Richard felt his throat tighten. Of course. As they went through the bedtime routine together, Richard awkward but trying, Evelyn guiding gently, Clara patient with them both, something shifted in the house. The cold marbles seemed warmer, the high ceilings less imposing, the silence replaced by quiet contentment. "Tell me about Mom," Clara said as she settled into bed. "A happy memory." Richard sat on the edge of her bed, Evelyn in the chair beside them. "She loved thunderstorms," he said softly. "She'd wake you up when you were a baby, and we'd sit on the covered porch watching the lightning. She said storms reminded her that nature was bigger than our problems." "I don't remember that," Clara said sadly. "You were too young, but she'd be proud of who you've become, brave and honest and willing to forgive." "She'd be proud of you too," Clara said, "for changing." Richard kissed his daughter's forehead, something he hadn't done in years. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Miss Evie." As they left Clara's room, Richard turned to Evelyn. "Thank you for coming back, for saving her, for saving us both, really. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Hale." "Richard," he corrected. "Please call me Richard." It was a small thing, but it meant everything. 6 months had passed since Evelyn's return, and the Hale mansion had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The heavy curtains that had blocked out sunlight for years were pulled back. Martha's photographs lined the hallways again. But most importantly, laughter had returned. Richard stood in the doorway of the physical therapy room they'd installed on the first floor, watching Clara work through her exercises with Evelyn's encouragement. He wasn't in a suit. It was Saturday, and he'd learned that weekends meant casual clothes, a revolution in itself. "Come on, Clara, 3 more steps," Evelyn encouraged. "You've got this." Clara gripped the parallel bars, sweat beading on her forehead. She'd been working toward this moment for months, walking the full length of the bars without stopping. Richard held his breath as she took one step, then another. "That's my brave girl," he said softly, and Clara's face lit up at his words. She made it to the end, collapsing into her wheelchair with exhausted triumph. "I did it. Did you see? I did it. We saw," Richard said, pulling her into a hug. "We're so proud of you." The we came naturally now. Somewhere along the way, they'd become a unit. Not a traditional family, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. That afternoon, they had visitors. The doorbell rang, and Clara wheeled herself to answer it. Another change, as Richard no longer insisted on formal protocols for everything. "Aunt Jennifer," Clara exclaimed. Jennifer Morrison, James's daughter and Clara's godmother, entered with her own children. She'd been estranged from the family since Martha's death, unable to watch Richard's coldness toward Clara. But news of his transformation had brought her back. "Clara, you look wonderful," Jennifer said, then looked up at Richard. "You both do." "Thank you for coming," Richard said, and meant it. "Clara's missed you." As the children played, Clara directing from her wheelchair with the authority of a general. The adults sat in the living room that had once been off limits for casual use. "I can't believe the change," Jennifer said quietly. "James told me, but seeing it, Evelyn deserves the credit," Richard said, glancing at Evelyn, who was helping Clara with a board game. "No," Evelyn corrected, looking up. "You deserve the credit for being willing to change. That took real courage." "Mom would be happy," Jennifer said softly. "Martha, I mean. She'd be so happy to see this." That evening, after the visitors had left, they held their weekly family meeting, something Evelyn had suggested and Richard had initially resisted but now treasured. They sat around the kitchen table, reviewing Clara's progress, planning the week ahead, but also just talking. "The Foundation's first fundraiser is next month," Richard mentioned. "Clara, I'd like you to speak, if you're comfortable." About what? About hope. About second chances. About how families can heal. Clara considered this. Can Miss Evie stand with me? Of course. Then yes. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Clara's improving grades with her new tutor, one who actually engaged with her rather than talking over her. Plans for a vacation. Richard was taking his first real vacation in 7 years, and debate over what movie to watch that evening. As they cleaned up dinner together, another revolutionary change. The CEO of a major corporation washing dishes, Thomas, entered with an envelope. This just arrived by special courier, sir. Richard opened it, his expression shifting to surprise. It's from a National Care Providers Association. They want to present Evelyn with their annual Excellence Award. Me? Evelyn said, shocked. Apparently, someone nominated you, Richard said, smiling slightly. Someone who wrote a very detailed letter about your exceptional dedication, medical advocacy, and transformative impact on a child's life. You nominated her? Clara asked her father. She deserved recognition long before I was capable of giving it. 2 weeks later, at the award ceremony, Evelyn stood at a podium in a dress Clara had helped pick out, looking out at an audience of healthcare providers, advocates, and families. Richard and Clara sat in the front row, Clara in a special dress that matched Evelyn's, Richard recording everything on his phone like any proud family member. I'm not sure I deserve this, Evelyn began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I just did what anyone who cares would do. But I've learned something important this year. Care isn't just about the big moments, saving someone from choking, catching medical issues. It's about the small moments. It's about seeing someone who feels invisible. It's about hugging a crying child, even when protocol says you shouldn't. It's about believing families can heal, even when they seem broken beyond repair. She looked directly at Richard and Clara. The Hale family taught me that redemption is possible, that a father who seemed cold can become warm, that a house can become a home, that love, when given the chance, can transform everything. The applause was thunderous, but Clara's voice cut through it. We love you, Miss Evie. After the ceremony, at the reception, Richard found himself in conversation with other parents of children with disabilities. For the first time, he wasn't the distant billionaire, but just another father, sharing experiences and learning from others. Your story gives us hope, one mother said, that it's never too late to connect with our children. It's never too late, Richard agreed. It just takes being willing to admit you're wrong and having someone patient enough to show you how to be right. A month later, the foundation's first fundraiser exceeded all expectations. The ballroom was packed, the donations generous, but the highlight was Clara's speech. She sat in her wheelchair at the microphone, Evelyn standing beside her, Richard watching from the side of the stage. 6 months ago, I wanted to give up, Clara said, her young voice carrying surprising strength. My dad had fired the only person who made me feel visible. I thought I'd be alone forever. But sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. She looked at her father. My dad made a mistake. A big one. But he did something many adults never do. He admitted it. He changed. He learned that love isn't weakness, it's strength. He learned that protecting someone doesn't mean pushing everyone away. It means letting the right people in. She turned to Evelyn. Miss Evie saved my life by doing the Heimlich. But she really saved my life by seeing me. The real me. Not the girl in the wheelchair, not the poor sick daughter of a rich man, just me. Clara. And she taught my dad to see me too. The audience was silent, many wiping away tears. Families aren't just about blood, Clara continued. They're about choice. My dad chose to change. Miss Evie chose to come back. I chose to forgive. And now we choose to be a family, every single day. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later, as they drove home together, Clara asleep in the back seat, Richard glanced at Evelyn. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for seeing what we could become when I couldn't see past what we were. You saw it too, Evelyn replied. It just took you longer to believe it was possible. Will you stay? Richard asked, not because of the contract, not for Clara, but because this is your home now, your family. Evelyn smiled. Richard, I stopped thinking about the contract months ago. This is my family. You both are. 3 months later, On the anniversary of Martha's death, the three of them stood at her grave. Richard had avoided this for years, but now he came regularly, bringing Clara and Evelyn with him. "Hi, Mom," Clara said, placing fresh flowers by the headstone. "Dad's doing better. He laughs now. He even tried to bake cookies last week. They were terrible, but he tried." Richard chuckled softly, his hand on Clara's shoulder. "And Miss Evie's teaching me to cook," Clara continued. "She says I'm a natural. I think she's lying, but it's fun. We're happy, Mom. Finally happy." As they walked back to the car, Clara walking now, with just a cane for support, a miracle of determination and proper care, she asked, "Do you think Mom would like Miss Evie?" "I think she would love her," Richard said. "She'd love that someone was brave enough to stand up to me when I was being foolish. She'd love that someone loved you when I forgot how." "You didn't forget," Clara said. "You were just scared. Fear makes people do terrible things," Richard acknowledged. "But love makes them do better ones." That evening, as spring turned to summer, they sat on the porch Martha had loved, watching a thunderstorm roll in. Clara was curled between Richard and Evelyn, safe and loved. "Mom was right," Clara said sleepily. "Storms are beautiful." "Why's that?" Evelyn asked. "Because they're loud and messy and sometimes scary, but they make everything grow afterward." Richard and Evelyn exchanged a look over Clara's head, understanding passing between them. Their family had weathered its storm. Now it was time to grow. As the rain fell and thunder rumbled, washing the world clean, Richard thought about the man he'd been a year ago, cold, controlling, alone by choice. That man would never have believed this moment was possible. But sometimes it takes losing everything to realize the person you dismissed was the one you needed all along. Sometimes it takes a child's love to teach a man how to be a father. Sometimes it takes second chances to build a first family. And sometimes, just sometimes, the broken places are where the light gets in. What walls have you built around your heart? And who have you pushed away that might have been exactly who you needed? If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us it's never too late for redemption.